here at the Levin Institute. Most of you know who we are. We're part of the State University system, and we deal with many key aspects of globalization, both abroad and with the impact here in New York. And as president, I'm Garrett Utley, and on behalf of our board and all the colleagues and the staff who are here, we want to welcome you. As you know, almost all of you are related to the BARD program, either participants in it or friends of it or with it. And we thank Carter Page and the others involved in this, because we've had this relationship for some time now, and it works out very well, and we share the common interest. And it's good that our speaker today is going to be talking about globalization. So without any further ado, I turn it over to Carter and introduce our speaker and set the scene.
Great. Thanks so much, Garrick. Welcome to today's special session of the BARD Globalization and International Affairs Program's James Chace Lecture Series. We're fortunate to have as our partners in this event, as Garrick mentioned, the Levin Institute, and I'd in particular like to thank Garrick and for both his introduction and also for his ongoing support, and as well as with the rest of the team. Today's session is also co-sponsored by Foreign Affairs, the journal which James Chace led from 1970 to 1983. It's a great privilege to welcome Strobe Talbott. At the risk of introducing someone who's already well known to most of those in the audience, Strobe is the president of the Brookings Institution, a former Deputy Secretary of State under President Clinton, and most recently the author of The Great Experiment, the story of ancient empires, modern states, and the quest for a global nation. This book will be the focus of his remarks today. To help put today's meeting in some context, I'd like to note that the students in the BARD Globalization and International Affairs program live at the intersection of thought and action in the area of foreign policy. Their daily work effectively balances positions within leading international organizations as well as academic study here at BGIA. When I first had an opportunity to try to establish a similar balance between international action and ideas in my own life, two of the books which were among the most formative for me were works by today's guest speaker. First, the biography of Paul Nitze gave a telling account of the life and methods of one of the Cold War's leading arms control negotiators. Later in his book entitled At the Highest Levels, he considers the history of the end of the Cold War from the perspective of negotiations between the leaders of the United States and the Soviet Union from 1989 to 1991. When I ended up in a junior arms control policy negotiations position at the Pentagon in 1993, each of these books provided invaluable insights and frameworks for the work I did on U.S.-Russia arms control negotiations. Many echelons above me, while I was working in that position, Strobe took, that same year took a position as the ambassador at large and special advisor to the Secretary of State for the states of the newly independent states, and so which put him at the very center of these very same negotiations. He, in turn, became one of the drivers of U.S.-Russia relations during that important era of each of our nation's histories. Fast forwarding a few years to the present, in his most recent book, The Great Experiment, Strobe Talbott has comprehensively taken on many of the biggest issues the world is facing today. He does so by looking through the lens of big history, meaning a view of the world which cuts across a long scope of time and indeed multiple dimensions. As you'll see today, the book benefits from the multiple elements of his background as well. It has a journalist's sense of history, of story, a scholar's rigorous analysis, and the been there, done that credibility and insights of one of the leading foreign policy practitioners of our time. So based on our initial discussions with the class at BGIA, I'm confident that this important book will provide a benchmark guidance to the BGIA students involved in future international projects in a way that's very similar to the effect which his works a few decades ago affected my life then. So while I considered myself extremely fortunate to have had the opportunity to access his insights as a reader of the books in the past, the fact that this new generation here has the opportunity to engage with him directly is nothing short of invaluable. With that, I'd like to turn the floor over to our distinguished guest, Strobe Talbott.
Thanks, Carter. Ricardo, could I ask if you'd be, you got very high-class help back there technically. There's no reason for you to be looking at me. I'd like to have no distractions and just keep your eye on the screen. But first, let me just say how delighted I am to be here. Carter, I regard ours as the beginning of a new friendship. You were kind enough to plug my book. I would like to plug Carter's book, soon to be a completed and successful PhD dissertation. And then it'll go on to be a major trade hardcover, and then a paperback, and perhaps eventually a movie. It's going to be on the civilizational roots and basis for the geopolitics of Central Asia. I think that'll be something like that, and you'll have a much catchier title in that, I'm sure. It says something about what good company I feel myself to be in, that pretty much everybody that I have interacted with since getting up here a few hours ago, I've been speaking Russian with. And that means Carter and Jonathan and Garrick. And Garrick, thank you for your hospitality here today. Final, more than a grace note, but a heartfelt sentiment. It is a particular pleasure to be here under the auspices of something that bears the name of James Chace. James was a friend, he was a colleague, he was a mentor, and last but not least, he was an outstanding editor for me. And I miss him very much, and I'm glad to be part in some way of keeping his memory alive. Now, globalization is already a word that's come up. It's associated with the Levin Institute. It's associated with Bard College, and particularly with the program that Jonathan and Carter are involved with. And it's very much associated with what I want to talk about. As I think perhaps all of you are aware, globalization is a word of fairly recent coinage. It didn't really exist before 45 years ago or so. But the phenomenon that the word globalization defines or is associated with actually goes back many millennia. And so does what I call the great experiment of global governance, which is my topic this afternoon. And that means that necessarily we've got quite a bit of history to cover in these opening remarks of mine, which is one reason that you see the slide that you do in front of you. But I promise that before I'm done with these opening remarks, we're going to relate the fate of this gentleman you see in the painting, who ended his life 2,400 years ago, to the fate of these young people who are just beginning life today, and more specifically to the challenges that they face as a result of many global challenges, and in particular, these three: climate change, nuclear war, and the meltdown of the global economy. Those are, of course, very modern problems, and they require future-oriented solutions. But those solutions are rooted in a big idea that has ancient roots, namely the big idea that for better or for worse, humanity is a single community. And each of us has a share of responsibility for that community's survival. So that brings us back to this painting by David. As I'm sure you all instantly recognized when you came into the room, it shows the last moments on earth of Socrates, just before he drinks hemlock, thereby carrying out the death sentence imposed on him by the ruling powers of Athens. Socrates was punished in part because he claimed to be not just an Athenian or a Greek, but a citizen of the world. The official charge was impiety or disrespect to the gods of the state. The point is that that claim of being a citizen of the world made him, in the eyes of many of his contemporaries, a traitor. Today, the idea of being a citizen of the world is still pretty controversial, and notably including here in the United States. But the phrase also has had some high-level endorsement. Barack Obama, for example, echoed Socrates when he called himself a citizen of the world in a speech in Berlin last July. Jack Kennedy used the same line in his inaugural address in 1961, and Ronald Reagan used the phrase as well in 1982.